right, we're talking about Alzheimer's. My mother had dementia. Her brother, my grandmother, died of Alzheimer's at age 58 in 1957, and it has Alzheimer's on her death certificate. I know, which was very unusual back then. Ernie is his mother's primary caregiver.
Yeah, and if you've been a regular listener to the channel, you've probably heard a lot of my journey. I've shared it as we've gone. And yes, I am. My mom, she has dementia, not Alzheimer's.
Well, that's one of my first questions for our next guest. 7 million Americans are living today with Alzheimer's. The Alzheimer's Association is on a mission to have a world without Alzheimer's disease and all other dementia. They are the leading voluntary health organization working on the national and local level to provide care and support to those affected by Alzheimer's and to advance vital research toward methods of treatment, prevention, and ultimately a cure. I'm honored tonight. I'm going to MC the Alzheimer's Gala of Hope to support this kind of research, education, and funding. And joining us now is Richard Elbein. He is CEO of the Houston and Southeast Texas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So, Richard, first of all, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thank you.
And you went through this too with your family.
I did.
It touches so many people. I know I said 7 million Americans. Do you have any idea how many in Houston or Texas?
Well, in Texas, it's about 460,000.
And then you got to figure they have children. They have spouses.
Right, the number of lives it touches.
I mean, you can almost triple, if not quadruple, that number as to how many people are affected. And even grandchildren. I saw my grandmother go through this. It's because that was on my father's side. I've got it all over the family.
The interesting thing in our family line is it just seems to have affected my mother. We don't seem to have other relatives that have that. And so it starts to make me wonder, we're looking at causes. Oftentimes it's been said you don't know and for sure until after the person has passed when they examine the brain and things. For me, the question is, does it matter how we categorize the dementia, if it's Alzheimer's or a different version of it? It's simply dementia is the bigger battle in the room. Am I right or wrong in that?
Well, so dementia is just an umbrella term that describes a set of symptoms. So when you observe a set of symptoms, changes in memory, reasoning, those kinds of cognitive functions,
right,
then you say, okay, that's dementia. The next question should be, what's causing the dementia? Mm-hmm. And that you want to know because first of all, some causes are treatable. It could be that it's multiple medications that are interacting. It could be a thyroid condition. I mean, there are a lot of things that could cause some kind of cognitive change. But even if it's a related dementia, so Alzheimer's or related dementia, so the treatment for Alzheimer's, at this point, we now have 2 effective therapies that slow the progression of the disease. Those therapies don't work for frontotemporal dementia or Lewy body dementia or Parkinson's-related dementia. So you'd want to know because you'd want to know what therapy is going to actually have an effect. From a caregiver perspective, though, it's the same. Once you know it's dementia, then what we as caregivers have to do is similar. We're going to be supporting them in the same ways. We're trying to make sure that they continue to have a meaningful life experience, that we're not in a punitive way taking away their independence, that we're trying to support their independence as long as possible. And that's going to look very similar regardless of what form of dementia they have.
So as an organization, what is it you are working at? Where's your aspect of what you're doing, what you raise money for, what you try and publicize? What is the area for you folks?
So at the local level, we're supporting families affected. We're trying to change the health systems in our communities to make sure that they're sensitive to the needs of families dealing with Alzheimer's. We're supporting the research community, making sure that they have access to funding sources. So we're involved with legislation both at the state and federal level, and so there's some legislation that we're working on this session that's trying to improve the quality of care and the experience of folks in Texas who are living with Alzheimer's. So we do all of those things at the local level.
Now, often when we think of dementia or Alzheimer's, people just immediately think memory loss. What can you tell us about the progress in studies and research what are we understanding today more about dementia and Alzheimer's?
Well, so we know that there are different kinds of dementia and that
Right.
those dementias affect people differently. What we know is that Alzheimer's is primarily a change in memory. So that's, I think, why most of us, the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's. That's about 70% of all dementias. So most people think, oh, dementia, Alzheimer's, it's the same thing and it affects memory. But of course, I think we're all familiar with, for example, Robin Williams or Gene Wilder, who suffered from Lewy body dementia. And the primary or the first hallmark of Lewy body dementia are visual hallucinations.
Oh.
So that's a completely different
Is
kind
that
of...
what Bruce Willis has?
Bruce Willis has frontotemporal dementia, and that primarily affects their personality changes and speech changes. So they start in different parts of the brain, and because they start in different parts of the brain, the first noticeable change would be different. So, for example, Parkinson's disease also eventually can manifest as dementia. But the first thing you see in Parkinson's is a mobility change, where in Alzheimer's, the first change is a memory change. But over time, a person with Alzheimer's, as that disease progresses through their brain, may affect mobility. So at some point in those two diseases, they may look very similar. Someone may have mobility issues and memory issues. And that's why early on in the evaluation, a physician will do a history and physical. And the reason for the history is to say, what did you notice first? And if the first thing was, well, they started having changes in their gait or difficulty getting up, okay, that's a mobility change. Versus a person who has Alzheimer's, the first thing you would have noticed is they're repeating themselves. They've forgotten how to do familiar tasks. So those are all memory related.
Okay, I have more questions. We're talking to Richard Elbein, CEO of the Houston and Southeast Texas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. If you'd like to join the conversation, 713-440-8870. So here's the next question. What is the difference between early onset and late onset Alzheimer's?
Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit different term because we prefer the term younger onset versus early because it gets a little confusing. Is it early onset or is it early stage? So just to differentiate, so younger onset is when the disease starts to show up in a person younger than the age of 65. So, your
Like
58-year-old grandmother had what we would now term younger onset Alzheimer's disease, if it was Alzheimer's. Or younger onset dementia. So generally, what we see is that starting at the age of 65, the prevalence of the disease ramps up, and it ramps up over a period of about 5 years. It continues to ramp up. So at 65, it's let's just say 1 in 10 people has Alzheimer's, will develop Alzheimer's. By the age of 85, it's maybe 1 in 3. So it's quite a bit more prevalent because the single biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's and dementia is age. So as we age, our likelihood of developing Alzheimer's increases.
As we've seen with a lot of different illnesses and diseases, it seems to be it's more prevalent. But is it more prevalent, or are we getting better at diagnosing it and we're living longer, so we're seeing it? Or is there something in our environment, our biology, something that is increasing the number of these cases, do you think? And I know you're not a medical doctor.
I was going to say, put a big asterisk after my name. I am not a physician, and I do not play one on TV. Well, I mean, we certainly know that people who live longer have a risk of developing all kinds of chronic conditions.
Getting old is not for sissies.
Exactly. And but it appears that it's an increasing risk that is related. I mean, there are a lot of risk factors. We know genetics is a risk factor. It's not the largest risk factor. As I say, just aging is the largest risk factor. So
what about the genetic variants that 23andMe tests for? I don't have either one of them, fortunately, but do those hold any water?
They do, and so ApoE4 is a significant risk factor. There you carry 2 ApoE genes, And so if you have two of them, you have a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's than the general population. If you have one, you have somewhat more risk. That's not the only genetic risk factor.
What else
So,
is?
well, there are hundreds of genetic risk factors, and then there are also some genetic factors that may reduce your risk. And so, we're still very early in the process of understanding the impact of genetics. We know that lifestyle, so the studies around lifestyle say that as much as 40% of our risk is related to lifestyle factors.
Well, let's explore that, because you always hear that if you exercise, Celeste runs all the time, if you exercise and maybe take some of these, ginkgo bilobas and things. I mean, let's talk about those kind of homeopathic things that you could do and lifestyle.
Yeah, so we're just completing a study. Houston was one of the sites in the United States. There were a total of 5 sites, and Houston was one of them, looking at lifestyle intervention to reduce the risk of dementia in folks who are at high risk. And so we don't know the results. We'll hear the top-line results at the international conference in July. But that study was looking at the lifestyle factors of exercise, cognitive stimulation, social engagement, diet, and medical management of chronic conditions that we know increase your risk. So we know people who have chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, those conditions increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So
when my mother was first diagnosed with pre-dementia, they did give her these pills that, you could basically get at a vitamin store that I think are jellyfish, maybe. Is there anything you can take, I guess, when you're first diagnosed?
Yeah, so I guess I would ask the question, is there anything that you know of that you can take that reduces your risk of any chronic disease? It sounds great, but honestly, have you ever heard that somebody solved their heart disease by taking a vitamin?
But molded cheese has really come out as a bacteria. There are things out there that we discover in time. Look at pig's blood.
When we're looking at the young onset of dementia and Alzheimer's, and you're looking at younger people, what are some of the things or questions that someone might ask themselves if they're seeing changes that could be connecting? When should you see a doctor is basically what I'm trying to say.
We've all walked into a room looking for our glasses that are on our head.
Our glasses, our keys. When does it actually start to be a problem?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting question, because the new medications that I mentioned that actually can slow the progression of the disease are apparently most effective, and perhaps only really effective, if they're started in the very early stages of the disease.
Right.
So when we talk about early stages of the early stages of the disease is when I know there's something wrong in my brain, but you all probably don't know yet. You haven't really noticed it. By the time I'm repeating myself and I'm starting to have slippage, probably you're noticing and I've stopped noticing. So we need the person themselves to raise their hand and say, my thinking does not feel like it used to feel. So, for example, I'm great with numbers. I remember all kinds of numbers. If I start noticing that skill is not feeling the same way it used to, I should be paying attention to it. Whether that means I notice that the dogs next door now bark all night and I don't get the sleep I need, so maybe it's a sleep issue, or that I've started on a new medication and it's affecting some aspect of my thinking. But I should be paying attention to that.
Last year, a woman spoke, a physician spoke at the gala, and she was talking about a blood test you can get done that shows markers of Alzheimer's or dementia. Is that still out there and available? Is that something?
Last year when she spoke about it, it wasn't available then,
right?
And it's still not available. So there is under study. There is a blood test, which we expect within the next, 18 months, will be approved and available. It currently is not, and part of the reason it's not is that in order to use a blood test, you have to have a standardized set of markers. So that your cousin in New Jersey is getting the same blood test and getting the same information as the person in Houston. And right now, the standardization has not happened. So we know that there are blood biomarkers that identify those two indicators of Alzheimer's, amyloid and tau. And those can be found now in the blood. And so in research, it's been shown that that's possible.
Well,
but it's not available for prime time yet.
How can people find out more information about the Alzheimer's Association?
Well, they can absolutely call us, 800-272-3900, and they can go on our website, alz.org. And if they add /Texas, they'll get to our local chapter and can find local resources.
well, I'll see you tonight.
Great.
And I'll probably be calling you soon. So
Well, we welcome anyone to call us if they need support, because this is not something that people should do by themselves.
Thank you.
Richard Elbein is the CEO of the Houston and Southeast Texas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Richard, again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.